You know, it's easy to think of clinical psychology as something that was just discovered, right? Like it was always there, waiting to be found. But the truth is way more interesting. This field wasn't found, it was built, piece by piece, over 150 years of arguments, breakthroughs, and flat-out revolution. It was intentionally constructed.
So how did this whole thing get built? Well, let's walk through the architectural blueprint of our story. We're going to look at 6 major phases, from laying the very first foundations, to a single theory taking over, to the first cracks appearing in that monopoly. Then we'll see how it was forged in the fires of war, leading to an explosion of new tools. And finally, what it all looks like today.
All right, let's start at the very beginning, laying the groundwork. We're talking about a time when the idea that someone without a medical degree could treat mental distress wasn't just new, it was a truly radical, almost rebellious concept.
In the very beginning, the entire structure for treating the mind was built on one single massive foundation: neurology and medicine. That was it. The focus was pretty narrow, classifying severe psychoses, conditions involving a loss of contact with reality, and treating what they called hysteria, which was kind of a catch-all term for a huge range of psychological symptoms. And this was purely a physician's territory. No one else was allowed in.
Okay, next up, let's see how one incredibly powerful theory came to completely dominate the entire field. It created this massive structural barrier for the new, emerging profession of psychology, a real stronghold.
In that early landscape, you had these pioneers chipping away at the problem. But it was really Joseph Breuer, and especially Sigmund Freud, who constructed the most powerful pillar of all, the psychoanalytic stronghold. And that thing would define treatment for decades to come.
So what exactly was this psychoanalysis that had such a monopoly? Well, Freud, who was a neurologist himself, basically proposed that our minds have these different levels: conscious, preconscious, and unconscious. He believed our problems came from these repressed conflicts hidden deep down in the unconscious. And the therapy itself? It was a talking cure designed to bring all that hidden stuff to the surface.
Now here's what's really fascinating. Freud himself wasn't totally against non-medical folks doing therapy. But his followers, they were way more rigid. They aggressively argued that only physicians should be allowed to practice psychotherapy, creating this medical monopoly. This effectively locked psychologists out of the treatment game and kicked off these professional turf wars that, honestly, still echo today.
But of course, no monopoly lasts forever. The first structural cracks in this medical stronghold started to appear in a very surprising place: the treatment of children.
Think of it like a new wing being added to the main building. While adult psychiatry was this medically restricted, doctors-only zone, early ventures like William Healy's 1909 Child Clinic created the first real spaces where psychologists, psychiatrists, and social workers could actually collaborate as a team, using new tools like play therapy.
But the really crucial blow came from an architect of change, Carl Rogers. He didn't just add a quiet side wing. He directly challenged the foundation of the whole building. He stood up and argued that trained clinical psychologists were just as capable, just as effective as medically trained analysts. It was a direct shot at the monopoly.
And in 1942, he published the blueprint to prove it. His book, Counseling and Psychotherapy, offered the very first formal model of therapy that was not based on psychoanalysis. This was huge. It permanently broke the chain and established therapy as a legitimate, independent profession for clinical psychologists.
Now, a theoretical blueprint was one thing, but it was going to take a massive global crisis to force the construction of this new profession on a scale that absolutely no one could have imagined.
World War II created this perfect storm. First, you had a battlefield crisis, thousands of soldiers suffering from what they called battle fatigue, which we now know as PTSD. Second, a massive medical deficit. The VA had 40,000 psychological casualties on its hands and nowhere near enough psychiatrists to treat them. This led to the third step, a government mandate to train an estimated 4,700 clinical psychologists to fill that desperate gap.
And the result of all this government investment was an absolute explosion. Get this. In 1946, there were 0 formal university programs for clinical psychologists. Just 4 years later, by 1950, a full half of all psychology PhDs awarded were in the clinical field. It's just an unbelievable transformation.
This post-war expansion also blew the doors open for women. After being largely excluded from the war effort, female enrollment in these new programs surged. They went from just 13% of the field to eventually becoming the overwhelming majority in the profession today.
Okay, so now we've got legitimacy, we've got government funding, and we've got this massive new workforce. The post-war era became an incredible construction boom. A whole new set of therapeutic tools and approaches were developed, and the field's capabilities just expanded at lightning speed.
This new, diverse toolbox offered completely different blueprints for change. You had Rogers' humanistic approach, which focused on creating a super supportive environment for growth. Then came behavioral therapy from folks like Joseph Wolpe, which was all about changing specific, unhelpful behaviors. And later, cognitive behavioral therapy from Aaron Beck, which zeroed in on identifying and changing distorted thinking patterns. The field was no longer a one-trick pony.
Of course, with all this new power and responsibility, the profession had to build some critical infrastructure to make sure the public was safe. This meant creating rigorous ethical codes, real guardrails to define the professional space and protect that sacred therapeutic relationship. Things like, not socializing with or accepting expensive gifts from clients. The field also started to think bigger. Instead of just standing downstream and pulling people out of the river with treatment, they started asking, hey, can we go upstream and stop them from falling in the first place? This was the birth of prevention, a public health mission focused on education and getting at the root causes of distress before they start.
So, after this incredible 150-year construction project, what does the finished structure of clinical psychology actually look like today?
Today's guiding blueprint is the biopsychosocial model. It's this really smart, integrated approach that finally gets that our well-being isn't just about our biology, or just our psychology, or just our social world. It's about the complex, interconnected way all three of those things influence each other.
And the very look and feel of therapy has been transformed. We've moved way beyond the classic image of a passive patient lying on a couch free associating. Now it's a dynamic, face-to-face collaboration where the therapist and client are active partners rolling up their sleeves and working together to solve problems.
And that really shows the full 150-year journey, doesn't it? From a tiny subdiscipline of medicine through all the theoretical battles and world wars, it's become this massive, independent, global profession. And despite all those radical shifts, the core mandate, the unifying blueprint, has stayed exactly the same: to apply knowledge and skill to help people.
But here's the thing about a structure like this. It's never truly finished. It's constantly being renovated and expanded. Which leaves us with a final, really fascinating question. As our world keeps changing, what will the next blueprint for clinical psychology even look like? What new wings will we need to build?